I never expected that the first time I'd truly see my father break would be over a pair of perfectly shined boots during his first 48 hours of Army basic training. I mean, here was the man who had survived a childhood of poverty, built a successful engineering firm from the ground up, and never once flinched in the face of any crisis our family ever faced. He was our rock and immovable force, yet the sheer, relentless psychological and physical pressure of day one almost brought him to his knees, not because of a 50-mile ruck march or a terrifying drill sergeant, but because of a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail that symbolized the death of his old life and the ruthless birth of a soldier. It made me wonder, how much of our identity are we willing to surrender for a uniform, for a greater purpose? And was the immense personal cost worth the badge of honor he wore for the rest of his life? I've wrestled with that question for years, watching him carry the weight of those early days. Tell me, would you trade everything you are for a chance to become something entirely new? To truly understand the crushing reality of what he went through, you have to know a bit about the man who walked into that Army receiving station. My father, Robert, wasn't a young man fresh out of high school. He was 32, a husband, a father of 2, I was 4 at the time. My brother was a baby, and a man who had already established a comfortable civilian life. His decision to enlist in the National Guard, specifically for an officer track that required him to go through the full, grueling enlisted basic training first, wasn't driven by financial desperation or lack of direction. It was driven by a profound, almost philosophical need for discipline, a sense of belonging to something bigger, and, frankly, a desire to prove to himself, and perhaps to his own distant military father, that he could measure up to the highest standards of physical and mental fortitude. When he told my mother he was signing the papers, she was terrified. When he told me, I just thought he was going on a very long, very serious business trip. His departure day was surprisingly subdued. He hugged us all, gave my mother a long, silent look that was filled with both determination and apprehension, and then he was gone. But the real good bye, the one that broke him down and rebuilt him, happened hours later in a place called Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. The first part of basic training, often called the reception, is designed to be confusing, dehumanizing, and utterly exhausting. My dad described it as a purgatory of endless lines, paperwork, and fluorescent lighting that never turned off. He was stripped of his civilian clothes, his wallet, his watch, the symbols of his previous identity. He was given a massive duffel bag of ill-fitting gear and told constantly that he was slow, stupid, and insignificant. This was the first psychological blow, the systematic, non-stop erosion of the ego. But the true, unforgettable trauma of day one started when they actually got to the training company. Dad and his cohort, a motley crew of nervous, disoriented men from all walks of life, were packed onto buses and driven in the dark to the barracks. They piled out of the bus, and that's when the noise hit. Not just yelling, it was a coordinated, overwhelming, deafening assault of sound. Drill sergeants, figures of absolute authority and fury, were everywhere, their voices amplified by sheer rage, correcting, insulting, demanding. The chaotic process of rushing into the barracks, being assigned a bunk, and having less than 5 minutes to start organizing their newly issued gear. It was all a deliberate overload. They didn't have time to think, only to react in a panic. The primary, immediate demand was simple: military bearing. Stand still, look forward, don't speak unless spoken to. But the practical reality was that they had to get their gear organized, their beds made, and their boots prepared for inspection. That's where the boots came in. My father, the meticulous engineer, naturally approached the task of shining his boots with a methodical, almost academic precision. He used a toothbrush, cotton balls, and the issued polish, working painstakingly for hours, trying to achieve the deep, reflective mirror shine that every new recruit dreams of achieving on their first try. He was trying to find comfort in the task, a familiar space of order in the surrounding chaos. He was convinced that if he just did this one thing perfectly, it would give him a small victory, a tiny shield against the storm. He spent the entire night, fueled by adrenaline and utter terror, working on those boots. Sleep was a luxury that simply did not exist. By the time the drill sergeants conducted the first official inspection at 05:00 hours, my dad felt a surge of nervous confidence. His bed was perfect, his locker neat, and his boots, he thought, were magnificent. They had a decent shine, better than most of the other recruits. The drill sergeant, a man my father would later come to respect, but at the time viewed as a purely malevolent force of nature, stopped at his bunk. He didn't look at the bed. He didn't look at the locker. He pointed a finger at the boots. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice that was infinitely worse than any shouting. "Private," he said, using that rank for the first time, a title that stripped away my dad's entire civilian existence. "Is this the best you can do?" My dad, trained by his civilian life to offer explanations and reasoned responses, made the mistake of saying, "Sir, I worked all night on them. They have a good glaze." That was the mistake. The drill sergeant didn't care about a good glaze. He didn't care that my dad had worked all night. He didn't care about my dad's past life, his degrees, or his family. The drill sergeant took his thumb, pressed it hard against the toe of the boot, and scraped off a small, thin line of polish. "If I can scrape it off, Private," the drill sergeant said, his eyes drilling into my father's soul, "it means you put too much on, and you didn't force it asterisk into asterisk the leather. It's superficial, Private. It's a lie. You are a civilian, putting on a mask of a soldier. This is not a shine. This is garbage." And then he did something that my father said broke him. The drill sergeant picked up the boots, walked over to the garbage can, and threw them in. "Start over, Private. And this time, don't lie to me. Don't lie to yourself. You have 20 minutes until formation." The sheer, pointless destruction of hours of meticulous effort, the public humiliation, and the cold, unfeeling delivery of the command shattered my father's composure. It wasn't about the boots. It was about the utter dismissal of his best effort, his identity, and his civilian idea of competence. He stood there, watching the drill sergeant walk away, and for the first time since he left home, he felt the despair of being completely alone, completely incompetent, and completely broken down to nothing. He felt the hard reality of day one. You are nobody until you prove you are somebody in their world, on their terms. So that's the situation I was in, trying to process my father's story decades later, realizing that the simple act of throwing away a pair of boots was the most defining moment of his journey in manhood and service. He was a successful, middle-aged professional, treated like a child, his best effort trashed, and given a task that seemed impossible to complete in the time allotted. He could have broken down entirely, given up, or tried to argue, which would have only made things worse. Before I tell you what happened next, how he went from that moment of utter defeat to finally earning the respect of his drill sergeant, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done. In my shoes, would you have let the despair take over, or would you have found a way, in that moment of absolute stress and fatigue, to start over? What is the breaking point for you? My father said he wanted to cry. The exhaustion was a physical weight. The despair was a black cloud. and the sheer audacity of the demand felt like a cosmic joke. But then something shifted. He looked at the discarded boots, and he saw the lie the drill sergeant spoke of. His shine asterisk was asterisk superficial. He was trying to fake it, to use his civilian skill set to bypass the military standard. In that moment, he didn't just feel anger. He felt a strange, cold clarity. He was there to be remade, and the system was doing its job ruthlessly well. He reached into the trash, pulled the boots out, and instead of rushing, he took a breath. He didn't have 20 minutes to make them perfect. He had 20 minutes to make them asterisk acceptable asterisk, and to show the drill sergeant he understood the asterisk lesson asterisk. He grabbed the water bottle, doused the boots, and started stripping off all the old polish. He used less polish this time, working it deep into the leather, following the drill sergeant's implied instruction. He worked fast, but with a new, focused intensity, fueled not by panic, but by a sudden, fierce determination not to let this moment define him as a failure. He didn't achieve the mirror shine, but he achieved something far more important: a deep, honest, matte sheen that would not scrape off. He stood in formation, holding the boots, not wearing them, as a point of order in the chaos. When the drill sergeant came back around, he didn't even stop. He just slowed his pace, looked at the boots, looked at my father's eyes, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. No praise, no forgiveness, just acknowledgement. "Put them on, private," was all he said. "And don't ever think I care about your best. I care about the standard, and the standard is perfection, not effort." It was a brutal lesson, but it was the one my father needed. That was the real end of his civilian life. From that point on, he stopped relying on his past achievements and started focusing solely on meeting the unyielding, often illogical, standard of the military world. He learned to operate on minimal sleep, under maximum pressure, and to find a strange comfort in the absolute black and white of the rules. He excelled in his training, not because he was the fittest or the fastest, but because he was the one who understood the psychological game the quickest. He stopped fighting the system and started using it to forge himself into the officer he would become. The aftermath was profound. That early struggle with the boots became his personal yardstick for every challenge he faced in his career. Whenever he was overwhelmed, he'd think back to that moment, to the cold feel of the dumpster boots in his hand, and remember that sometimes you have to strip everything away and start from zero to build something truly strong. He served with distinction for 20 years, and even when he returned to civilian life, the military discipline stayed with him. The crispness of his clothes, the order of his garage, punctuality of his life. He was a better husband and father for it, too, in a strange way. He was still loving and kind, but he was also calm under pressure, organized, and utterly dependable. He learned how to lead by being broken down and rebuilt from the ground up. He never forgot the sheer exhaustion and terror of those first few days, but he came to see them not as torture, but as the crucible in which his true character was revealed. He once told me, "They didn't break me with physical labor. They broke me by destroying my idea of who I was. Once that was gone, I was finally free to become the person they needed me to be, and ultimately, the person I wanted to be." So, that's the journey of the boots from a meticulous civilian's project to garbage, and finally to the polished symbol of a new man. It's a story about standards, surrender, and the strange power of starting over from absolute zero. Like this video if you were on my side, believing he could make it through that first grueling week. Subscribe for more stories like this that reveal the hidden truths behind the uniform and the sacrifices made for service. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did his drill sergeant go too far, or was that necessary cruelty the only way to forge a soldier? I'll see you all in the next story.